Just Faith got started as a national program in the year 2000. And very quickly after we got started, Bread for the World signaled to us that they were eager to be a partner with us. And for the last 18 years, we've enjoyed this continuous and a lively relationship with Bread for the World. So it's only a pleasure tonight to welcome Matt Gross from Bread for the World. Matt has been working as a professional organizer for over 20 years. He's led policy campaigns at the local, state, and federal level on a diverse array of issues related to affordable housing, hate crimes, healthcare, childcare, immigration, and more. For the last 7 years, he's worked for Bread for the World as the director of organizing. I think most of you know that Bread is a collective Christian voice working to urge our nation's decision makers on the federal level to end hunger at home and abroad through policy development, organizing, and advocacy. Matt leads a national team of 11 staff organizers working together with hundreds of Christians and hundreds of thousands of Christians and hundreds of congregations. Matt currently lives in Peoria, Illinois, with his wife, Haley, and their two kids, Anna and Gabe. So Matt, welcome and thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Lila. It's good to be with you all. I'm sorry for the scare and coming on late. I have to admit I was in a meeting in the Pacific time zone and had Central time zone, and then realized this was 6 o'clock. So I had my times mixed up. So I'm glad I'm with you. Technology is amazing. As I sit in Peoria, I was in a delegation meeting with a group in state and getting ready to come on with you all. So it's great to be here. As Jack gave a good introduction here, I'm just gonna. You'll notice one of the things he did not state in my my resume is that I'm a PowerPoint expert, because I am not. And I will just tell you, I hope I'm able to run it all correctly. I'm not a PowerPoint expert, and I'm not great at putting them together. So hopefully you'll get something out of the slides, and we can have a good conversation. I just want to share a picture of, this is my family. That's also my coworkers, because as like you all, we're quarantining in place. So I'm spending a lot of time with these folks. This is our quarantine graduation picture. My wife graduated from the U of I with a master's in social work, and my daughter Anna graduated from 8th grade. So they're at the really, I'm sure like all of you, my family is at the center of what I do publicly. So I always like to just to show a picture of them. I'll talk a moment here just about what Bread for the World is, but my experience in organizing in Just Faith go back a little bit. I first encountered Just Faith when I was an organizer in Madison, Wisconsin, and was working with a group of folks at St. Thomas Aquinas Parish there, who initiated me into what that program is and the power of it. And that group, out of the Just Faith training, became one of the strongest core teams we had in our membership of the IF affiliate organization that I was working with there, the Industrial Areas Foundation affiliate. So I'm grateful for the work that Just Faith does, and I'm really grateful for each and every one of you and your willingness to be part of it and be part of these calls. As Jack said, Bread is a partner with Just Faith, and a proud one. We're a national collective Christian organization. You can read that statement there, but I like to sort of put our mission sort of centrally focused, and it's something that our president-elect talks a lot about, Eugene Cho, but Bread is about politics and policy and people. And I say that because politics shapes policy, and policy impacts people. And as a Christian organization, we believe all people are created in the image of God, and we care and love people. and therefore we have to be engaged in politics because politics shape policy and policy impact people. That's at the heart of what we do. Politics is a dangerous word these days, especially sometimes in the church. I have a good pastor friends who always jokes, I'm not sure why people of faith get so ruffled about politics. He always says we invented it. Politics for bread is probably different than what we typically think about in our dominant culture these days. But again, politics is about policy and people for us, and it's about bipartisanship or nonpartisan work. We work with both sides of the aisle. We Democrats and Republicans from our board on down. We work on issues of hunger and poverty to try and find common ground, common space that we can seek to end hunger and poverty in our world. So that's a little bit about bread. I wanted to, for my presentation, I've been thinking a lot about, and as I wake up every day and look at the newspaper and look at images that I would describe as sort of scarcity images of empty shelves and people in lines and whatnot. I've been thinking a lot about that word scarcity, and also about its counterpart of abundance and sort of that tension. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the story of loaves and fishes, and start there and sort of contextualize the rest of the points I'd like to make about advocacy in the context of that story. I'm sure it's a story that you're all familiar with, so I'm not going to read it, but I've recently been reading over the Mark's narrative, and so I just wanted to lift up a few. Let's see. I'm sorry. I gotta lift up a few points in there. Right. The central tension in that story, I would argue, and I'm not the first to do it, is what I think is the central tension in our culture and perhaps in our faith, and it's one that's perhaps more acute now than it's ever been, at least ever been in my lifetime. That's for sure. But it's that tension between scarcity and abundance, right? And the scarcity mentality comes out in the reaction of the disciples as they were, invited by Jesus to go away on retreat. So you can imagine they were ready and waiting for a little R&R. You can imagine sort of their frustration when they see this crowd, this enormous crowd. I sort of think it's perhaps how some of us are feeling every morning when we wake up and look at the newspaper and just think, oh my gosh, I don't want to deal with it anymore. I just want to throw it away, right? Throw it in the garbage can, send it away. And that's how they respond, right? They respond by saying, hey, let's just send them away. Let's get them out of here. Right? Send them into town. They can fend for themselves. And of course, that's not how Jesus responds. Jesus sees the crowd. He has compassion for it. I think he also sees beyond just that crowd and as a problem, but he sees what it can be. And Jesus' response is one that challenges us to be in what Walter Brueggemann calls a liturgy of abundance, right? So Jesus pushes the disciples into relationship with that crowd, and he reinforces their leadership in doing it. I think one of the key components of that story, and the narrative completely shifts, is 2 points. One, when he tells the disciples, hey, this isn't just your burden to bear. Why don't you go see what the crowd has, right? And he sends them into the crowd to look for food. And they come out with the loaves and fishes, not very convinced, obviously. But the second part of what he does there, I think, is an organizing story. And it's one that gets overlooked time and time again. But he instructs the disciples, and I imagine Jesus could have gotten up on a rock or something and done this himself, but he instructs the disciples to go out and organize the crowd into groups of 50 and 100. And I like this picture. It's one of the few I've seen where you can literally sort of see the groups are sitting in groups of 50 and 100. They literally go organize the crowd. And so for the first time, this crowd becomes a community, right? And then Jesus blesses the bread, and instead of handing it out himself, which is often the depiction we see, he gives it back to the disciples, and he reinforces their leadership, and he says, you go distribute it. And as they do that, I think that's where the real miracle happens. And I don't think it just diminishes the miracle at all by sort of taking the magic out of it, by saying it's likely, I imagine, that as the disciples started handing out food, others in that community, as they started to see one another and get to know one another and see that folks were sharing, they started to share additional resources that they had, maybe that they were holding on to because they weren't exactly sure where this was going. So out of forming of a community comes common action and resources flow. Right? One other point that I think Mark really brings home that I think is important to note is that the disciples' own needs were met by trusting in the resources of others, by trusting in eventually in their own leadership and in the leadership of those in the crowd. As we know in the story, there were baskets of leftovers, one for all 12 tribes. That's the Liturgy of Abundance. And, I would invite you, as you go forward this evening, to think about that tension and to think about where you see it in your life, in the life of your church, your parish, your community, or the ministry you work on. Just to think about that, to reflect on that. To definitely go read Mark at some point. Think about that tension. And then I'd ask you to think about how specifically would things change if we always operated out of a liturgy of abundance instead of the myth of scarcity. So that's the question I ask myself, and I ask my staff every day. How do we operate out of an abundance, out of liturgy of an abundance, and especially in an age of COVID? How do we operate? How do we organize our advocacy in a way, in an abundant way, in a liturgy of abundance? So I want to just throw two things at you. I want to that answer that question for me. One is pertains to Bread's vision. Other is a story of work that's being done actually in Indiana as an example of how we operate, how we organize our advocacy from this perspective as opposed to a myth of scarcity. And then I want to just share with you a little bit of a legislative update and some next steps of how you could potentially do that with us in partnership. Let's see here. There we go. So I want to, this is one of the ways that, let me try to get my, I'm sorry, get the names out of here. All right, there we go. So one of the ways that we approach this in Bread for the World is we try to a liturgy of abundance in our vision and our politics. I would argue broadly, our politics and our political leaders and our laws are created in the context of a myth of scarcity. But that's not what Bread for the World, how Bread for the World tries to operate. I want to pause here because you'll notice I'm not going to spend much time at all talking about the problem. I'm going to assume, I hope correctly, that this is a well-informed crowd who have been paying close attention. Now, the problem of hunger is COVID is a hunger crisis. It's unprecedented, right? We know that last year we had about 37 million hungry people in this country. We expect that to go up by about 18 million due to COVID. Last year we had about 11 million hungry children. We expect that to go up about 18 million. So COVID is a hunger crisis. It is a big problem, right? And I don't want to ignore that or be tone deaf to that. And one other point on that, COVID's also shown just an incredible light on inequality in this country, particularly racial inequality. And each one of those things could, be a webinar in and of themselves. But I want to point us to where we go from there instead of dwelling in the problem right now. And if you have questions about that, we can talk about that. But So one of the ways that bread seeks to live into a liturgy of abundance is through our vision. And this chart that I'm showing, it's one of my favorite charts because it shows what makes me helpful even in this time. That we know we can end hunger and poverty in this world. And we know because we've shown it here. Because in a sense, there has been an exodus out of hunger over the last couple of decades. The chart on one side worldwide shows the enormous progress that's been made since 1990 in this world. The chart on the orange side is the progress that's been made in the United States. Most of that progress was made in the 1960s and 1970s. Since then, we haven't had an elected leader. We haven't had a government that's made ending hunger or poverty a top 5 priority in this country. And we've held steady and pretty much played defense for the most part. But we know that this can be done. We know that with the appropriate policies, with public and private partnership, organized from the federal, state, local level, that we can end hunger and poverty. And we know because of this. We can see beyond just a crowd of hungry people to a vision of a community, and a community that is one that all are fed. What I also want to talk to you about is abundance in our advocacy and organizing. Now, I'm the director of organizing at Bread. I'm based in Illinois. I have staff. I have 10 organizing staff all over the country, including one here in Indiana, which is where these pictures are from. But I want to talk to you about our offering of letters and the model that we approach and how it models this liturgy of abundance. And I want to do it by talking to you about our Indiana leadership team, and particularly one person in particular, Charlie Gardner. In this picture is in the, as you're looking at it, the back row to the left in the blue shirt. Charlie is retired from the Indianapolis Archdiocese. He worked there for a long time. Retired several years ago and been a long-time Bread member and part of our team there. And when Charlie retired, he decided that he wanted to spend more time with Bread and certainly working to end hunger, but also more time because he saw Bread and he saw the offering of letters as a really effective vehicle for him to build relationships, both within his parish, but across his parish and others, and as well as other congregations. And so Charlie worked with me to develop what he called sort of a collective offering of letters. It started about 5 years ago, and he started with his parish, a small parish, and which he himself would say they didn't ever have a ton of success in terms of collecting letters or generating a ton of traction in the parish. But unlike sort of the disciples in the story of Mark, he didn't turn inward. He didn't turn doubtful. He didn't sort of think, hey, this isn't enough. I'm not doing enough. Instead, he said, hey, I want to build relationships. I want to reach out. I want to talk to more people. And so that's what he did, just through good old-fashioned phone calls and cups of coffee. He reached out in his own parish and met people where they were at, particularly the people who walked by his table whenever he did an offering of letters, but talked to them about who they were, what they cared about, and saw them for the resources they had and invited them to participate. He reached out to other parishes, and within 2 years, he had brought 12 Catholic parishes together who started doing this offering of letters together, and continued with this mentality of he wanted to continue to reach out and build relationships. Now, Charlie was always guided by wanting to end hunger and get our elected leaders in Indianapolis to be more responsive. But as I said earlier, it was never his primary goal. His primary goal was wanting to build relationships and be ecumenical and bring folks together. And that was important because politics, as we know, it is tough, right? It's hard, and we don't always get the successes that we want. Often they take a long time. So if our evaluation of what's effective is simply going to be measured by getting congressmen, whoever, to vote yes or no, then we're going to be in for a long haul and one of a lot of disappointment. But Charlie's vision was always built first in bringing people together, building relationships, and building the kingdom of God, if you will, right there. Long story short, over the course of about 6 or 7 years, Charlie has, with others involved now, has built that process into about 47 churches, the majority of whom are in Indianapolis, but a growing number in Fort Wayne and Terre Haute, some in Evansville, and across the state. It's now statewide in that regard, who now work together over the course of a year to conduct an offering of letters, writing personal letters and sending them to their elected leaders, and then following up those letters with in-district meetings, coming to DC when they can, and taking other forms of public action. They've built an incredibly effective network of advocacy in Indianapolis, Indiana, probably our strongest statewide network in the country. The story on the right side of the screen is sort of the culmination of that. Over the course of these 7-8 years of doing collective OLs together, we built a pretty strong relationship with the Republican senator in Indiana, one of the senior Republican senator, Todd Young, and decided we wanted to do a public event with him. And this is an event with about 400 people that we generated out of those churches who worked together, where they literally came together and were a church with the senator. Our work with him had pretty much been focused on international issues, of which he's been a leader. But this was the first time we got him to publicly speak about SNAP and domestic hunger, and met him where he's at and moving him to where we'd like him to be. But that vision is a culmination of the vision that Charlie had years ago, when he spent many years sitting in a room, pretty much often by himself, inviting people to write letters, never doubting. Well, I'm sure he did doubt himself. I know he doubted himself in his own mind, but always positive, always thinking about how can I build more relationships? How can I invite more people to this table, invite more to be involved and be connected? So leadership, moving a crowd to community, knowing that out of community comes common action. That's the model of what Bread for the World's advocacy is. And it's a model that's changed over the years when we focused more on just writing individual letters and putting them in the mail. We do that too, but we're now working to figure out how do we continue to bring congregations and parishes together in community to create collective action that can strengthen those communities and create relationships, but also be more effective in speaking to our elected leaders and more effective in getting them to respond to issues of hunger and poverty. And we've seen that in Indiana with the legislative record there too. So I want to just share with you what our liturgy of abundance and advocacy looks like right now. Right now, this is the focus of Bread for the World. This is the focus of our network across the country. It's the focus of our staff in Washington, D.C. We're focused exclusively right now on the HEROES Act, the bill that passed the House just a few weeks ago. You can see there's the two primary components that we're concerned about. One was a SNAP increase, asking for a 15% increase in maximum benefits. That's something that we've been lobbying for since the onset of the pandemic. Unfortunately, it was left out of the first of the previous stimulus bills. The House passed it. The House passed bill does include it, and we applauded that. Unfortunately, in that $30 trillion bill, there's not a single cent for international relief and support, and that's upsetting to us. I mean, if there's one lesson that comes out of the pandemic, I think it's that we're all connected. We all need each other, and supporting our brothers and sisters internationally is important. Bread works on domestic and international issues, and so we'll continue to lead there. Our focus has moved to the Senate right now, and that's where we're weighing in and asking the Senate both to pass a bill that includes a SNAP increase and includes $12 billion for international support. We're also working to encourage work at the state level to allow SNAP to be used online and to expand pandemic EBT, which you can see provides food purchasing benefits to families who have children who would have received free or reduced price school meals. That pandemic EBT has been passed and approved. We're trying to get it extended throughout the summer so that kids, summertime is generally the hungriest time for most kids. That's certainly going to be true this year. So we're continuing to stay focused there as well. So really the invitation to all of you is to act together with us. Now, everything I've suggested, you can go do on your own or within your own congregation or parish, and that's just fine if that's where you're at. That's what I invite you to do. But first and foremost, the first step I'd ask you to consider is one, to consider being in relationship with us, allowing Bread, allowing my staff to support you where you're at, wherever you're at on your advocacy journey. As we talked about, a key to maintaining a liturgy of abundance is being in relationship, being in community, and we can help you with that. So I just encourage you, if you'd like to go online and find your organizer, you can figure out which state, who covers your state. But if you'd like to be introduced personally, go ahead and drop me an email. I'd be happy to introduce you to the organizer who's working in your state or your region. Again, we're happy to help plug you into what we're doing, but we're also more than happy to come alongside you and figure out how we can support you, and really to encourage you to figure out how you can build something like what I've talked about in Indiana. Maybe not that big, but something like it, and we can support you in doing that. Some of the key advocacy steps that I'd invite you to take now, and you can do all of these digitally. Of course, one of the first things folks always ask is, well, how have things changed with the pandemic? And of course, everything's changed, right? Because everything's digital, everything's online. But in a lot of ways, nothing's changed. We're continuing to focus on our advocacy. We're continuing to work daily on the differences. It's just all digital. We're using more personalized emails and more Zoom meetings, but we're still doing all of the work of advocacy. So I'd invite you to consider conducting a virtual offering of letters with your church or your small group. And, don't doubt yourself. Don't say, well, I've got one person or two people and we can only get 5 letters. Think of the story, Charlie's story in Indiana, which started that way. And also, those 5 letters are perfectly acceptable, especially when combined with the thousands of letters that are being written every day through Bread for the World. You're in partnership and relationship with us. But consider doing a virtual offering of letters. You can do that online through sending personalized emails, or you can continue to write handwritten letters. We have folks who are doing both, and we have resources that can help you with those. The other thing I'd invite you to consider is we have our virtual advocacies coming up on June 8th and June 9th. Normally on those days, we would be gathering in Washington, D.C. with about 350 or 400 folks in person. Obviously, that's not going to happen this year, so we've moved the whole event online digitally. Now, I know if you're like me, the thought of having to sit in front of a computer for 2 days is not overly appealing. But if I'd encourage you to go there and register, all the events will go live will be live on June 8th. There's a few events on our agenda that are actually live. Most are taped, and you'll be able to watch them when it's convenient for you. But the one thing I would encourage you to make sure you attend is the legislative briefing that'll happen on June 9th. That'll be a live event. And then we'll invite you to take an action on June 9th as well, in which we'll have a national day of mobilization, in which we're hoping to deliver about 20,000 personalized emails on June 9 itself. Finally, as part of that, normally during our June 9th lobby day, with those hundreds of people, we're conducting 150 to 200 lobby visits on that day. We're not going to try to pull that off. But we are doing about 100 lobby visits over the course of June. So if you'd be interested in being part of one of those or organizing one of those, let me know. Let your organizer know. We'll support you in that. We'll connect you into an existing meeting that's happening, we'll support you in reaching out to schedule one of those meetings. One of the I guess benefits of this time is that we've seen is Congress is particularly receptive to hearing from us right now. That doesn't mean they say yes and do everything we want, but we've been getting enormous response from congressional office and willingness to meet with us and talk with us and hear with us. So it's an opportunity for all of you to make sure that your voice is heard and that you're weighing in with your elected leaders. We can help you do that, and we can support you in doing that. So I think I'll end there and see if there's any questions.
Matt, I received a question in the chat, and it's asking about doing a virtual letter signing for this individual's parish, and that's typically something they do in person, but they're going to do it in October, and it might be virtual. Is there a way, the question is there a way to set up a system so that their parish can know how many letters were sent virtually from their individual parish? Is there a way to count that? Yeah, so that's a question. Thank you.
Yeah, yep, great question. Yes, there is, and I think what I would encourage is being in touch with your organizer. Actually, what all of my staff are doing is they are setting up what's called Bitly links to be able to track source code locations of emails. So we're doing that all over the country. So yeah, we can help with that. We can support that, and it may already be being done in your state or your region, not knowing where they're calling in from. So, but that is something others are doing, something we can help you with. And if you want to check our website to find out your organizer, drop me an email, and I'll connect you with the appropriate person.
Matt, I have a question if I can jump in. Does Bread still consider a handwritten letter superior to any kind of electronic communication?
Yeah, I think, the key thing is personalization. I think handwritten letters are still what we consider to be the gold standard, but personalized emails are almost as effective as well, from what the Congressional Management Foundation tells us. So I think personalization is key. And one of we're in our virtual OLs right now, we're really encouraging doing both because, as you can imagine, emails and letters arrive at different times, and we want to be able to weigh in effectively right now on stimulus legislation. So many of our organized OL settings are both simultaneously inviting personalized emails to happen right now, and encouraging folks to do personalized letters and put those in the mail so that impact will come a little bit more down the line. Another thing that I didn't articulate well about the collective OL effort, the nature of Congress has changed over 43 years. The nature of the church has changed. When Bread started 43 years ago, handwritten letters in the mail, that was the only way to communicate. And partially driven by this story in Mark, we've sort of gone back and looked at and challenged ourselves of what's the most effective way to organize ourselves to converse with Congress. And so to me, I've really started to put a vision of offering of letters as an organizing tool, not just an advocacy tool. And what I mean by that is an offering of letters is an opportunity for you to write something and understand something. It requires you to take 3 to 5 minutes, which in our culture is a long time right now, amazingly, but it is. So it requires you to think about something in a little deeper way than perhaps sending an email does. But we're also trying to organize those letters into a collective. So in Indiana, in Joliet, in New York, and all sorts of other places, we have folks working together to write letters, collect them together, and then instead of putting them in the mail, we're hand delivering them to offices and setting up meetings and putting those letters in front of the elected leaders. So last year we delivered 5,500 handwritten letters to both senators in Indiana, and had a conversation about what was in those letters and what our requests were. It's a powerful community tool. It's also a powerful advocacy tool. Todd Young knows who Bread for the World is now in Indiana, and he knows the leaders who organize that. We've become almost power brokers in that regard, so that's part of the vision. Is as you think about how do you create a liturgy of abundance in your advocacy, consider not just writing a letter and putting in the mail, but consider inviting someone else to do it with you, whether that person is in your parish or bringing another parish into it with you, or working with the staff person in your diocese to figure out how can we use this tool to strengthen relationships across parishes. In Joliet, we're using the offering to strengthen sort of the disconnect between the Latino community in that diocese and the Caucasian community in that diocese. And we're grounding it in our advocacy together, with one of the core goals being we want to build relationship across those differences and similarities. That's a long answer to your question, Jack, but
thank you. I'm aware of time, and I know that some of you have other commitments, so I'm going to close for now. I want to thank Matt. This is one of the ways we can express our appreciation, even though everybody's on the mute button. You can put your hands together so Matt can see that you appreciated his talk. So thank you. Thanks, Matt. It was great to have you with us. We so appreciate your work. We appreciate our relationship with Bread for the World. We appreciate the impact that Bread has had on the world. And we're just delighted to enjoy the partnership we have with you.